In Reagan's second inaugural speech, he said, "Let history say of us, these were golden years." And they were, especially looking back now. And from what I read about from people that joined these platforms that even voted for him back then and remember those times, they compare it a bit to now, and not just the two presidents, but the effects and the feeling. And that's one interesting thing. And they say that in a lot of ways that Trump is Reaganesque, and even some of the people that are opposed to the agenda compare the two, and they don't mean well, but it comes out to a lot of similarities in the two, of course, also, but the time and those kind of years had the best of everything. It was before Marxism took over too much, and while it had a bit in politics, the globalists and such, it hadn't really in TV and movies and in everyday life much back then, or at all to most people yet. That changed fast after he got out of office, but during that time it was when you read about it and what I even remember of it, it was the best of pretty much everything. And what they say about now is that they feel a little bit of just that feeling, and maybe simpler times mixed with feeling safe and having that strong kind of leadership that had been 30 years since this country had, and that kind of leadership's normal. But now a lot of people, I think that's one thing that the millennials are kind of afraid of somehow, is because they just haven't seen that type of normal leadership, and they believe the globalists and all the media and everyone when they say how bad it is, and they don't remember that because they're just a bit too young to have caught that, and to have caught the tail end of the good times and of that era, and how safe that people felt. I see that a lot when on the comments of YouTube and on Twitter now that pretty much a lot of new people are joining it, and people of all ages, and they're saying that they compare the two, and they're saying that back then they felt so safe when Reagan was in charge, and they felt not only the strong leadership, but just even the way that he spoke and gave speeches, they knew that everything was okay. And that's the kind of feeling that they have now again, where people feel like they can kind of relax a bit because they have a strong leader in charge and making decisions that are best for this country. And that's the same as back then. And I imagine though back then that wasn't that unusual. So for the people who liked that, and his second election, he won in a major landslide. Other than Nixon's second landslide, that was one of the biggest ones. Nixon's was the biggest one ever still. And that shows that people wanted that kind of leadership, and for the people that still wanted it now, that it had been a long time since then, whereas before it hadn't been. They had 3 years of indifferent leadership, followed by 4 years of weak leadership, and then Reagan. And so that was kind of more normal then. But people talk about the Reaganesque times now and seeing the two speeches, whether it's the State of the Union or at the National Rifle Association Forum, or even the inaugural addresses or just speeches, they're very similar because they're reassuring yet strong, kind of like letting everyone know that, like, here, I got this. And people have that same kind of feeling that they had then, and that, I think, draws a lot of people to Trump and to that kind of strong leadership, and why the populism and nationalism is rising. And Stephen Miller, he's one of the few America First people left in the White House, and apparently he's going to have a bigger influence this coming year. So that's good. It's always good to start off the new year with some positivity. And for one of these, I was thinking of doing it on a lot of different subjects, but figured I'd just keep it a little more positive this time. And there's a lot of similar things are going on now, but Trump, he's moving at a real fast pace because there's a lot to fix since it had been all that time. And it wasn't even so much that the leadership was weak in between. It was that all those presidents, they were like CIA operatives, and they weren't for America, they were for the Marxist agenda. Like the first Bush, he was at the around the scene of the JFK murder, and he said that at first he said he wasn't, then later it was that he was. And I thought that was one of those events that you just don't forget. So we had that's what was being dealt with during the in-between times. So now Trump's working fast to get things more back to normal, but the interesting thing is that if you just go by the feel, it does feel a little bit more like normal. Like you see these headlines, like today, they said that they're having more border patrol agents, they're hiring more on, and the border patrol say that they enjoy working under him, that he's the best president that they've been working under, and some of them have been there for years. And a whole lot of like the similar optimism too. There's a whole lot of optimism with not just the stocks, but the economy and the more jobs, and it's on the upside, and it's good to be positive, and it's also good to keep watch, because the last time, the 30 years ago, it was a different, I mean, there wasn't the internet, and the news wasn't on all the time, and in a way that's good, but then like you get used to that kind of the good times. You didn't foresee it ever ending, so you didn't know how to try to keep it going. You didn't think you'd have to try to keep it going. And so now you just have to be aware, like with the voter fraud and with the different issues, because if people like the way it is now, as most do, they want to keep it going, and this time they don't want to have a whole generation go by until you have another leader like this, because countries need these kind of strong yet reassuring leaders that for some reason they seem hard to find, even though there's so many people. It can't be that hard to find. But so you'd want to just be on the lookout just to make sure that globalism and communism, the left, doesn't infringe even more, since they basically have the culture still, no matter what administration's in charge. At least for now they do. They didn't back when Nixon was in, and some say that they're going to lose it this time again, and so that the right will dominate the culture too. I'm not sure that if that, Milo even said that, I'm not sure if that's being too optimistic, but he said that that the next 30 years aren't going to be anything like the last 30 were for the social justice warriors and all the unhappy people, the alt left. And so we'll see what happens with that, but a lot of it in 1 year, a lot of the alternative media says that Trump did as much as Reagan did in 8 years, and that is partly because, as I was saying, it's just a faster time and more needed to get done, and more needed to get done faster, because it had been so long since the strong leadership, and because it's the globalists had more of a hold back then, more of a hold now than back then, and so he needed just to be quick. And there was that, and also even though there's a lot of resistance now with this president, back then with Reagan having the first Bush as vice president and having been shot less than a year in office, he couldn't, there was only so much that he could do. And while Trump, he's able to do more, so he does all that he can, and what both did left a mark on the country. And now I think most people do look back and say that history does remember those as the golden years, as that golden decade, basically, that he was in there. And it's nice to have a bit of that feel again, and it's nice to see that maybe it can grow and maybe it can have more of that, because there's no reason not to. There's no reason that it has to be headed in one permanent direction. It can come and go. It can up and down. So if it was that, then it wasn't. There's no reason why it can't be that way again. And so it's nice when you read other people kind of saying that they see a touch of that too, and they see potential of it going back, because those three leaders were the strongest ones that we've had, at least in the past half century, and maybe more, and some of the best ones that we've had in this country that have made the most difference, and that the people really liked what they did, and were good for this country. And this just shows that things can change, and we can have that kind of leadership again, and that there are a lot of good things, just like it's the best of times and it's the worst of times, and it is nice to stop and see the good in it all too.